Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Savage, candidate for U.S. Senate, running against Susan Collins here in Maine under ranked choice voting. We're very pleased that you've taken time to be with us today. This is the fifth in our series, a webinar series, The Way Forward, dealing with issues of the day. These free informational webinars have been very well received. We've had almost 10,000 views on the first in the series. And today we're going to be talking about something that's so close to all our hearts. And really, no matter where we are in the United States, this is a problem. And that is the crisis of homelessness and what to do about it. It seems that the complaint that I hear many times is that people who are experiencing homelessness or have experienced it say that their voices aren't at the table when solutions are being discussed. So we're very happy and grateful to have presenters today that know whereof they speak. They have experience being unhoused, and they're not just talking about theories and policies, but they're talking about real people's lives and what kind of impact being unhoused has, and what are the kind of things that lead to a person finding themselves homeless. So we'll be hearing today from Jess Falero from Portland. We'll be hearing from Cheri Honkala from Philadelphia, and we'll be hearing from Pat LaMarche, a former Mainer who now resides in Pennsylvania. And we will, let me tell you a little bit about the format that we use. We'll be hearing from each of our presenters for about 10 to 15 minutes as they tell us, share with us what their thoughts on the subject are, and they'll show us some slides. And during that time, if you, the audience, have questions, you can put them in the Q&A part of our webinar Zoom space here. Chat, feel free to chat with other presenters, but if you put the questions into the Q&A, we are the most likely to find them. And in the Q&A, the audience can also upvote questions. They can indicate which questions they would most like to hear discussed, because we typically get more questions than we could talk about. Generally, we have about 30 or 40 minutes at the end of our 90-minute webinar to address questions. So make sure that you know, if you're, while you're listening to Jess, if a question comes up for you, go ahead and put it in the Q&A right then. You don't need to wait. And one of the Lisa for Maine team will be looking at those questions throughout the webinar. I'm very happy to see that we have all our presenters on board. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first presenter. Jess Valero is a housing advocate and community organizer. I was very pleased that Jess spoke at the introduction event for our campaign way back on October 10th. It seems like a long, long time ago. And we made friends on that day. And I feel that we're still friends. And I have a lot of respect for the work that Jess does in their community. Jess Falero is 23 years old, non-binary, an advocate and community organizer focused on the intersectionality of the housing crisis, homelessness, and the foster care system. They've been homeless for a majority of the past 6 years after aging out of the foster care system. And their recent advocacy and organizing includes an on-the-ground mutual aid working with unhoused youth and the Portland City Hall encampment, which made a big splash here. And many of you may have heard of it even outside of Maine. So welcome, Jess.
Thank you, Lisa. That was quite the introduction. I think that we're still friends too. I guess I'll get right in here. My name is Jess Valero. I am a 23-year-old non-binary organizer and activist in the unhoused community. I've been unhoused for a majority of my life, and this work has been healing for me and my journey of finding community, quality of life, and purpose. I have testified in front of the legislature in Augusta on multiple bills, organized the homeless encampment in front of Portland City Hall, and provided mutual aid to the unhoused community in Portland. I work every day to empower the unhoused community to utilize their voice and speak their truths. When we talk about homelessness, we leave so much out of the conversation. We talk about unemployment, poverty, mental health, and substance use, but skirt around the surface and never talk about the root causes and what keeps people homeless. We act and speak as if homelessness is a moral failing instead of a systemic failure. My role in this work is not statistics and policy. It's bringing the direct experiences of people to the conversation, including my own. How often do you walk past people experiencing homelessness and think, I wonder what their story is? I think more often than not, our first thoughts lie in the realm between walk faster and maybe they won't talk with you, and let's go around to avoid interaction. This is the stigmatizing fear that I speak of. By denying them the human experience interaction, we withhold the opportunity for healing and community. This stigmatic fear perpetuates the dehumanization of our community as a whole. In order for us to move forward with solutions, we must first recognize people's fear, and we must own our fear and recognize the stigma that our society perpetuates and uses to demonize those in the margins. I would like to address how that manifests tangibly. More often than not, people experiencing homelessness have had housing instability for longer than we acknowledge. And along with this housing instability, we will find harrowing stories of trauma and abuse that perpetuate this instability. But we never look at those things. What we find is that people experiencing hope with our capitalistic narrative of how our society should be. These folks sustain themselves and add value to our community, but they need resources and support to continue doing so. Housing instability is so much more than mental health, poverty, or unemployment. It's a deeper systemic issue that we refuse to talk about at the formal tables of decision makers. That has to end. People's lives are on the line while we whitewash and water down trauma experiences. We continually pat ourselves on the back for providing the bare minimum for our most vulnerable community, which is erasure. People in power continue to make decisions that affect our vulnerable community members' lives as they are speaking on behalf of something they've never experienced firsthand. Because of this, we never address the root causes of homelessness. Because of this, we also perpetuate the barriers and obstacles people experiencing homelessness face. What can we do? As of now, the narrative around homelessness in Maine and in the country is false, dangerous, and misleading. We have to acknowledge the harm that we have caused our unhoused community by ignoring their humanity and ignoring their voices. We must first move forward to acknowledge our biases and unlearn the stigmatic fear that keeps us from acknowledging humanity and keeps us in this cycle of perpetuated harm. This is step one. Step two is acknowledging that the shelter system and the continued institutionalization of unhoused people are not true solutions, but band-aids that continue to harm and perpetuate the instability of our unhoused community. Instead, we need to work directly with unhoused folks to identify alternative solutions and recognize their dignity and autonomy to know what they need. When we talk about the shelter system, we often pat ourselves on the back for the work that is being done, but we never talk to those directly impacted by our work. How can we say we're doing a good job when the people in our care are suffering on a day-to-day basis and not getting what they need? We can no longer allow our unhoused community to live in squalor and ignore their needs while we make decisions for them that often harm them. Step three, then, is to go deeper than the Band-Aid solutions and look at how to combat the root causes of homelessness. When we talk about homelessness, we need to first address the inadequacies of the foster care system. We also need to talk about domestic violence and elder abuse. We need to talk about human trafficking, substance use disorder, and how perpetual harm is caused daily by not giving folks tools and resources to heal stigma and bias. Before we can really address these root causes in a concrete way, we need to talk about our fear surrounding these stigmatized experiences and how that fear prevents us from looking at the situation honestly and compassionately, and instead encourages us to do the bare minimum and look away. Only when we do the internal work I described in step one can we begin to build community between housed and unhoused people. Until there is mutual respect between housed and unhoused people, there can be no true solidarity in the work to end homelessness. We as a society must first learn to listen, to trust, and value the thoughts and experiences of directly impacted people, because until we do, we will just be making uneducated and inexperienced guesses as to what they need. There are masters in this crisis. They are the people who are living through it. The notion that we can solve it without consulting them is absurd. This brings me to step four. which is to bring the unhoused community to the formal decision-making tables in the country. I have already touched on how decisions we make on behalf of directly impacted people cause more harm than good, regardless of our intentions. I have also touched on how common biases against unhoused people dehumanizes them and prevents others from recognizing their brilliance, wealth of experience, and autonomy. Additionally, we've already established that our current solutions for homelessness are not true solutions. These do not take into account the root causes of this crisis and cannot fully do so until the unhoused community is fully heard, respected, and understood. Therefore, if we are able to combat our biases and recognize that the people who are most informed about this crisis are the ones experiencing it, the logical next step is including them then in the process of making decisions at every level. Nobody is more familiar with the root causes of homelessness than the people who have experienced them. If we can eliminate our biases, recognize that our current system is failing, and together with directly impacted people begin to look deeper at the systemic inadequacies that cause homelessness, we can move forward in community under the leadership of directly impacted people and begin to truly solve this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. That was very eloquent. I do believe that this system where everything is for profit is, been so poor at meeting the needs of people, real needs of people. There are countries that would be ashamed to have anyone homeless. And in America, we just have thousands, millions homeless, and think it's just the normal kind of thing. Obviously, there are all kinds of, economic factors playing into the bad decisions that are being made to not create housing that is attainable, and the pandemic came along and we were told just stay home, and the first question in your mind is like, what about people that don't have a home to just stay home? Seemingly no one wanted to address that the solution was to just stay home, and if you didn't have a home to stay in, well, that was going to be your fault and your problem. It's not a good time right now to be unhoused. It's never a good time to be unhoused, but particularly now. I do want to share with our audience that thank you for being here. And we have an opportunity to contribute to a fundraiser for the Maine, or rather the Portland, the Maine People's Housing Coalition. They have a fundraiser to create either a rent to own or outright buy a portable shower unit. We'll talk about that more at the end of the webinar. But I know that someone on the Lisa for Maine team will paste a link in to the chat so that you can find your way there. We are going to donate half of all the donations we as a campaign receive from tonight's webinar until midnight to go toward that project. And they're about halfway there. They need about $85,000 and they've raised about $43,000. So it's definitely an attainable goal. We're going to go next to Pat LaMarche. And Pat is an author and housing advocate. Pat was born in Providence, Rhode Island, and went to Boston College and the University of Amsterdam. She now lives in central Pennsylvania, but she spent many years in Maine, and at one point ran for governor of Maine as a Green. She has spent decades as a broadcaster turned homeless advocate. And after years of reporting on poverty around the globe and at home, she went to work with the nation's most forgotten and least understood population, the unhoused. Pat dabbled in broad spectrum social change, culminating in a 2004 run for vice president of the United States as a Green. She's now self-employed, writing books and donating her time to the foundation she and her husband started to support writers, artists, and musicians with the great acronym WHAM, W-A-M, and playing with her grandchildren. I also know that she will mention this, but Pat has a book out recently for children, like a chapter book for upper elementary age. It's called Priscilla, the Princess of the Park. I read it this summer and I highly recommend it. So welcome, Pat. Thanks for being with us.
Oh, you're never so smart as your mute button. Forgot to unmute myself. Thank you, Lisa. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to be part of this discussion, which doesn't happen often enough, and just another proof that you should be the next United States Senator from Maine, the fact that you're even thinking about these things instead of shuffling the unpleasant discussions to the back of the table. I'm also thrilled to be here with Jess and Chris. Chris, I mean, she's a hero of mine, so that's kind of exciting. And Jess, you're becoming one as well as I get to know you better. You know, foster care is such an important discussion because what happens to children we pay someone to care about when we stop paying them. And I'll just back up a little bit and say a little bit about my own history as a homeless advocate. I was brought up by a woman who thought that hunger was the worst sickness because it was so easily cured, but nobody did it. And so we always thought about people that were disadvantaged and hungry. And I grew up that way. So when I was busy raising my own children as a single mom, I used to volunteer at the Greater Bangor Area Homeless Shelter, which, you know, once you're a volunteer for about 3 months, you're an authority on everything. I'm not trying to put volunteers down, but you get this feeling that you've just really understood the project, so the problem. So for about 8 years, somewhere in there, I would cook dinner for one night a week. My mom would buy the groceries because I was a single mom. I couldn't buy my own groceries. So she'd buy all the groceries and I'd cook the meal and we'd drop it off. And it was a really great experience. My kids got to help. And I thought that I understood things and I really cared that there were people without homes. So when I was tagged by David Cobb to be the vice presidential candidate for the 2004 election, I told him I wanted to do something about the people that I cared about. And I wanted to do something about mommies and veterans and elderly and the disabled and just everyone I cared about. And every one of those demographics is found in the homeless community. They all experience homelessness. And so when I ran for vice president in 2004, I lived in homeless situations all across the country. During the campaign, I slept in shelters when there was space. I never took anyone's bed, obviously, because that would have been criminal. But I slept on floors. I slept on couches in the shelters. I slept in parks. I slept on the sidewalk in front of Dick Cheney's house. You know, I had a big sign that said, "Hey, Dick Cheney, come sleep with me." Thinking, you know, thank God he didn't take me up on that. But anyway, so I lived this incredible experience, all the while knowing I had a home. I had a place to go. I had a washer back home at the end of my trips that I could throw my clothes into. And so at the end of the vice presidential race, I had this notebook full of stories from the road where I was with these homeless folks and folks experiencing homelessness. And so I wrote a book. And from writing the book, I got tapped by a minister in central Pennsylvania who was running a homeless shelter. And I ended up working and being the second in command of several homeless shelters in Pennsylvania. Some of them were HUD funded. And this here is, I love what Jess said about we absolutely have to have the people experiencing the problem playing a role in the solution to the problem. And that is exactly the opposite of what HUD does, the Housing and Urban Development. I worked at HUD shelters where if you told anybody that what their preconceived notion was false, you could lose your funding. So all these people who have real hands-on experience are afraid to tell the truth to the big guys because the big guys are punishing. And it doesn't matter. Obviously, I'm neither a Democrat or a Republican, so I feel very comfortable saying that I was a homeless shelter director during Republican administration and during Democratic administrations. And while one was definitely better by degree, the ball was dropped constantly. And what was a dysfunctional system has turned into a nightmare. HUD figures say that there are about 500,000 people on the street. I put that number at about 10 million. The Department of Education says there are 1.5 million homeless school children. 1.5 million homeless school children. They don't even count perfectly. That means, let's say, another million homeless toddlers and babies. We've got all their parents. We've got the unaccompanied youth. We've got elderly, rapidly growing subsection of the homeless are the elderly who don't have a Social Security check that will beat the rent check. It's just incredible the number of people who are uncounted. And so I put the number about conservatively at 7 million, probably closer to 10. One of the things that HUD does, and one of the things that Jess really inspired me to bring up was HUD does a point in time count where one night, usually the coldest night of the year, they send do-gooders and case managers and volunteers and people who work for them out into the wilderness and the inner city to count homeless people. And what they're counting are the people so desperate that they don't mind being seen. The people who are unhoused, who still have their car or a way to hide or a way to not be counted, is so enormous compared to the tiny number of folks that are actually capable of being counted by HUD. But then when they do find someone, what I find even more horrific is the questions that they ask them. Are you a drug user? Do you come from a family or your household? When your household had a household, was there drug use? Domestic violence, is that a problem? AIDS, is that a problem? Are you a veteran? They don't ask how long you studied for your homework tonight. They don't ask, what happened when your English teacher changed 3 times because your home changed 3 times last year. They don't ask how many hours it takes you to walk to work and home again. They don't ask anything that implies that they think the people experiencing homelessness have any other experience except for one of these 5 categories. And I am not saying that victims of domestic violence aren't homeless, they are. And there are people with substance abuse who are homeless, that's true. But I can take you a home and show you a substance abuser. I can take you a home and show you someone with mental illness. I can take you to a home and I can show you any of these labels they like to put on people experiencing homelessness. The difference between someone with a home and someone without a home is money. And that is the only difference. Poverty is the cause of homelessness. And then our indifference to that poverty is what perpetuates it. If we were willing to make an investment in housing, then we would have people housed. So I see the slide has changed to Paradise, and I spent a better part of January, February, and March of 2020 in Paradise, which was only about 13, 14 months after the Camp Fire made 27,000 people homeless in a couple of hours. My new book, Still Left Out in America, which is coming out this week. I mean, you can pre-order it on the Sunbury Press website, but it will be out this week. I covered a large amount I had a lot of discussion about climate change caused homelessness. We have massive climate change events now, like the fires in California. I was an embedded journalist with Hurricane Katrina. The Hurricane Maria, there are some interviews in the new book with victims of the hurricane in Puerto Rico. We have these climate change events that are rendering entire communities homeless. And our response is horrifying. First of all, what we do, and we're doing it right now with COVID-19, one of the important things right now for the money that's been freed up by the CARES Act by the federal government is if you're going in there for assistance with your rent so you don't get evicted, or if you're going in there for other opportunities because you're already been out and now you need to get a home again, now you have to prove that it was COVID-19 caused in order to get help. So if you were unfortunate enough to be homeless March 6th, before the March 7th recognition of COVID-19, then you've been left out of the help. And if you were unfortunate enough to be homeless in Chico, California, before Paradise burnt to the ground, then when the Paradise FEMA money got there to help, which it didn't help enough. It doesn't even help much. Then the prior homeless can't get any of that help. So what we do and what we've already done in Paradise now, and what I saw happen rapidly in Katrina, is we give a damn. We've got a government that gives a damn for maybe a year or 14 months. And now the homeless that are still homeless in Paradise, the entire school system right now still is homeless children. Every single kid in the school system's homeless. When we look at this situation, we only want to look at it for a little while, and then the new crisis happens. And we never go upstream to see what's happening to cause the crisis in the first place. And A, abate that, and then B, direct the kind of resources necessary to immediately rehouse people. Just what Jess said. I mean, you don't even need me. Just have Jess up there again, because they made the best points really about these things and what needed to be done. I don't know how much time I've been talking. I wasn't as well planned. That picture of Paradise, of that cloud, imagine that coming. And the problem for people who were trying to escape that fire was how dark it made it. You know, when you go into the smoke, the little smoke trailer that the fire department will drag around, and you can go in there and experience a room full of smoke so you can learn how to crawl along the floor and get out. Well, that's what the entire Sierra Nevada ridge that has Paradise and Magalia and Sterling City on it, that entire area was a room full of smoke, and people couldn't see, and they hit the cars in front of them. And a 2-lane road became a 6-lane road with cars scraping past each other to flee this inferno. And then when that was all over and they needed a place to live, all of the hotels were filled up with rescue workers and engineers and people that came to clear the trees and people who came to clear the debris. And then still the people who were displaced couldn't find a place to live. The impact of these massive homeless events is not even understood. And when I was an embedded member of the press at Katrina, I was told, along with every other person in the press that we were there, that if we ever called the people refugees, we would be put on a plane and sent home. We weren't allowed to be able to call Americans refugees, even though they are refugees, because we'd get put on a plane and sent home. And so there's a language that we're supposed to use about the poor people that are around us, so that we don't ever empathize enough to change our system of government.
Thank you, Pat. That was very informative. Changing our system of government is what many of us here are all about. I don't think corporate parties are going to solve the problems that have been created by corporate government, because they take money from the people who profit from this system and flood our airwaves with advertising, claiming that they will do the best job for us. But as we can see, we just keep descending into more and more people being without basic human rights like housing, healthcare, and so forth. And a narrative in the media that basically says it's their fault. But thank you very much for helping to push back on that narrative with your publications, among other things that you've done. So I'll remind our audience that we're happy to have you here with us. We're about to hear from our third presenter. And during, when you're hearing our presenters talk, if you have questions for them, if you would use the Q&A function on your Zoom webinar screen to pose questions, and then look at other people's questions and see if you want to upvote any of those, saying, yeah, I'd like to hear that question discussed. We'll be doing that after we hear from our third presenter. And we're very, very pleased that she's taken time to be with us here today. Our next presenter is Cheri Honkala. She is the National Coordinator of the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign, a founder and leader of that campaign. And before that, the Kensington Welfare Rights Union. And she became famous when, as a homeless mother herself, she began breaking into abandoned government-owned houses and occupying them in order to survive. As we all know, there are many, many, many houses sitting vacant while people are unhoused. And some strong activists, such as Cheri, take it into their own hands to say, this is not right. And I can I can do something about this. Cheri has traveled internationally to meet with peasant movements and revolutionary leaders, informing her practice. She's been involved in independent politics and has lived in Kensington for over 30 years. Last year, she was instrumental in launching the Poor People's Army, which seeks to build a nonviolent force outside the nonprofit industrial complex that can challenge corporate power. And I happen to know that recently the Poor People's Army was scheduled to arrive at Joe Biden's headquarters, but the Biden campaign threw up a quick fencing barrier so that the Poor People's Campaign could not reach that office. I'm hoping Cheri will tell us a little bit more about that. I think that she was on the scene when that happened. So welcome, Cheri. We're very glad that you're here.
I'm a formerly homeless mother. I've been doing this for 30 years. I didn't have any idea that at my age I would be traveling around the country, teaching people how to set up in homeless encampments and teaching people how to take over abandoned owned government properties in order to keep men, women, and children off the streets in this country. I started out of necessity, and you know, I'm in this movement and do this work every day out of my life for a different kind of necessity, but it's still a necessity. I think that I just want to share some of the lessons that I've learned over the years. And they really have to do with, I don't think that we're going to end poverty, hunger, and homelessness in this country if we continue to just have two corporate controlled political parties in this country, because there's a lot of money in keeping people homeless and keeping people hungry. And the shelter system is basically promotes organized disorganization. So like a mother goes in early in the morning to apply for shelter and she's got to stay there all day. And so she can't figure out where she's going to sleep for the night, or when they reject her at the end of the day, or you can't go and, you know, find some kind of temporary employment or any of those kinds of things. And both most major cities are controlled by Democrats, and like here in Philadelphia, it's an entire Democratic, you know, party administration and folks that are in power here. And there's a huge homeless encampment on the Parkway here, and also in front of the Philadelphia Housing Authority. And that went before a judge, and they ruled that they're going to dismantle those homeless encampments. Now, this is you know, again, a Democratic Party city in which this is happening. And so I think that unless we begin to get serious as poor people in this country to ask, where's the money coming from? Who's benefiting from it? Who's benefiting from gentrification? Do both corporate political parties really have our best interest at heart? I don't think they do. And so we're busy trying to, as an anti-poverty activist who's been at this for 30 years, most nonprofits get soft money from the two different political parties. So there's really no incentive to work on root issues, addressing poverty, hunger, and homelessness, and housing issues. So we really want to encourage poor people to move away from the nonprofit industrial complex and to begin to identify and establish new independent political alignments and relationships with people. And the other thing is, we as poor people in this country and homeless people, we need to figure out how to get organized. We don't need people that are not in the boxing ring to tell us how to move or how to punch or whatever. And so we've got to get away from just, you know, waiting for somebody to come out with some fancy research or that wears a suit and tie and tells us what the answer is. We have to begin to get away from silo organizing. And so that's why we became and created the Poor People's Army, because we thought it was important that we begin to ask and figure out who's really on our side, who's really going to support us, who's really going to help us stay alive, and get away from, just the Facebook and the Instagram discussions, and really map out a plan that's about power and not pity. And so we've seen it in, the faith community, and definitely in the mega, shelter and anti-poverty organizations, a silencing around and a supporting of poor people, or poor and homeless people organizing themselves. Some people will, support various different charity efforts, but we're really interested in ending poverty, hunger, and homelessness. And for an example, we have a group of cartographers. They call themselves Guerrilla Cartographers, and they're mapping out the whole country. They've mapped out Philadelphia so far. And when they disclosed to me how many abandoned houses per homeless person here in Philadelphia, I thought they were going to say, 2 or 3 abandoned houses, but no. In Philadelphia, for every homeless person, there's 10 abandoned properties. So we've got to get away from this idea that we're dealing with scarcity and that there's not enough to go around. In Philadelphia right now, they're talking about potentially building a new facility for the 76ers sports team here in Philadelphia, instead of addressing the issue of homelessness. So this is difficult work because basically at any given moment, any of the takeover houses that any of the homeless families are living in, they can move on. And because I'm not a part of the Democratic Party camp, we receive little to no news coverage of our work that's taking place here. And so we really have to develop our own independent media, because most people, when you hear, which we get excited that, people that have taken over like 1 or 2 houses in different parts of the country get lifted up from the media, well, we've got over 30 some takeover houses, and we've never stopped. And you will never hear about those things on any of the, media outlets. And yet, so my message is, we've got to get organized. We've got to, break with the master, because the master is not going to fund the dismantling of the master's house. And I would say that, the problem is really systemic. It's really a capitalist system that we live under, that doesn't care about any of us. And we've got to stop treating homelessness as if it's a behavioral issue. And I think that, more and more people are entering this equality of misery. And the more that they do, they're going to be erased. And definitely their voices are going to be erased from any form of media, because they're going to lift up all of the things that divide us, and not this growing equality of misery that's happening in this country. Because then maybe we would get united and do something about the thing that all of us are facing right now. You can go to economichumanrights.org. We hold boot camps across the country, teach people, how do you organize? How do you take over abandoned houses? How do you reclaim land? How do you do large mutual aid efforts? How do you deal with, you know, when you have an environmental crisis, like, you know, Katrina or Maria or whatever? And how do you regroup after those things and get people housed? So we have a 3-pronged process where we fight things in the legislature, we fight things in the courts, but I think now 80% of our work is really creating organizing this army across the country. So 80% of our work is going towards organizing and feeding, clothing, and housing these folks so that they can live in order to fight another day. That's it.
Thanks, Cheri. That was really powerful. And I know that we have some questions from the audience for you. So I hope you'll be able to stay on with us. And thanks for solving the audio problem. Always a challenge on these Zoom calls. There's always some technical glitches we have to work through. I was glad you brought up the difference, the distinction between charity and systemic change. Many people engage in acts of charity, and I tend to think of charity as kind of like voting. It's like I do it, but I don't stop there. It's a tiny, very, very light lift. In terms of really changing things for the better and really making a better world where all the children have enough to eat and a place to sleep and everyone is cared for and valued. So I was glad that you made that distinction. I used to focus mostly, I was a school teacher for 25 years in a pretty low income part of Maine. But I used to, in my spare time, do a lot of organizing and also being like a citizen journalist, reporting on things that I thought people would want to know about. Running for elected office is rather time consuming. So I have had to put that aside for now, and I just retired from teaching. But one of the things that I noticed teaching in a rural low income area is we often think of homelessness or housing insecurity in urban terms. Maybe it's more visible in an urban setting. Gentrification of our big cities where developers move into neighborhoods where they see a profit could be made, displacing the people that have lived there for generations and, turning the neighborhood into a trendy neighborhood that people will pay a lot to rent in or buy in is definitely driving a lot of housing insecurity. However, in rural Maine, where I've been teaching for many years, it's more of a housing insecurity issue where people might technically have a roof over their heads, but they might not be able to count on the fact that they'll be able to make the rent payment the next month. Or in many cases, surprisingly, children that I've worked with in schools, the families were living in a house that didn't have a heat or hot water in the middle of a Maine winter. That is really extreme. And people would go the whole school year that way. Not surprisingly, the children that are struggling with that kind of living situation are not super ready to, talk about phonics or learn the multiplication tables because they're so stressed from just dealing with the basic survival of life. And they're very stressed on behalf of their parents or their adult caregivers who are struggling mightily to provide for them. I remember one time we had a first grader who moved into town. He was there for a couple of months in the fall. He was new to our school. And then the family left again and then came back again. And the first grade teacher reported that the little boy had said, well, we were sleeping in a camper and I was sleeping by my dad's feet. And it was kind of hard to, I woke up a lot in the night, but at least it was warm. And then it just started to get too cold. This was around Thanksgiving time in central Maine. It just started to get too cold for us. So we're going to go somewhere else. There are thousands of children experiencing their childhood like that in Maine and millions across the country. So I want to keep those folks in mind as well. The stigma still attaches to poverty in rural places, but it tends to be a little more hidden maybe than it is in our cities. I think we're ready to address some questions from the audience. I saw a chat just now, so maybe someone else on my team will respond to it, that they were having a hard time getting into the chat. The first question is for you, Cheri. So what's the number one thing we in the audience can do to support the People's Army, and how should folks around the country get involved?
Well, the first thing to do is people can go to our website and kind of look around and figure out what you're interested in, because people have a tendency to stay around longer if there's something that they're really interested in. We have a role for everybody, whether it's art, music, whether it's distributing food, whether it's helping families get moved into various different takeover houses, whether it's signing up for the emergency task force, you name it. But I think the first one is really about how do we link all these scattered efforts across the country into one larger movement that's actually led by poor and homeless people ourselves. And so offering to hold a boot camp in your part of the country would be a fantastic thing to do. And all that would mean would be, signing up for it and helping us to organize the resources to bring some of our generals in the Poor People's Army to Maine, to Florida, to Mississippi, to wherever, or even figuring out a way, because I'm doing a lot of the teaching on how to do housing takeovers and how to set up large homeless encampments and how to fight them on 50 different legal levels. We're doing a lot of that training as well on Zoom. So it's literally offering the technology and the internet and going to the people that need to be talked to. So that's one very concrete thing that can be done. And then of course I'm always going to say money, because this movement doesn't run on love alone. We need stuff like tarps and heaters and bail money and all of those kinds of things as well. But I think that people have choices out there. They can decide, I'm going to give money to, this charity organization, or I'm going to give money to conscious, organized, poor and homeless people that want to end poverty and homelessness for their other brothers and sisters. I think those are two very different things.
Thank you, Cheri, for making that distinction. Jess has had some very recent experience with an encampment. I wonder, Jess, if you'd like to comment on your work with the encampment in Portland.
Sure. Anything specific?
Well, how did you organize it, and what were the, how did you do the collective decision making that every time I went down there, it had doubled in size. It was really a pretty thriving community there. And then why was the decision made to disband?
Sure. So the decision to disband was made because we realized that there was more need than what we could keep up with organizational wise. We made a lot of consensus-based decisions within general assemblies, but also within some unhoused folks that had stepped into leadership roles within the encampment. So that was basically how we organized and how we made decisions. We had a group of about 16 people that we would bring the situations to, our solutions to solve it, our proposals, and then we'd all just kind of like work together to problem solve as things came up. Our camp had about 80 people sleeping in it, 150 to 200 people accessing it every single day. We had a medic tent, so we had at least one medic there almost 24/7. We had a food distribution tent, so there was meals being dropped off 3 times a day, snacks that were there and available. We had people coming in to help with the clothing tent, so we had clothing supplies available. We coordinated with local social service providers to get some shower facilities open. We had volunteers coming in to volunteer in the police liaison role, so that when police came in, people always had their cameras on and recording at all times, and there to like de-escalate between cops and people that are experiencing homelessness. We had a lot of unhoused people rise to the occasion and jump into de-escalation roles, which was really huge in our encampment. And we really just like emphasized mutual aid. And it was one of the things that we came across a lot was that there was this scarcity mindset of that there isn't enough. So we had to work with a lot of folks around this stuff is for everybody. And when this is gone throughout this encampment, there will be more coming. So it was really just sad to have to work on that with people. And then we have the institutionalization traits come up where people are identifying the people that were coming in and just support roles as staff. So we had to kind of smash that institutionalization in some folks' minds that we are not staff, we are just supportive community members coming in to help throughout this protest. Yeah, I think that the biggest thing was I've been really just kind of in awe at how many youth, not just youth, adults too, but specifically youth like that are currently living at the teen shelter or camping out or staying in our encampment, stepped into leadership roles and are just like really excited about organizing.
Well, that's a great outcome. I think I noticed that you had solar panels down there powering the computers too. That was a nice touch. I know that there was a scarcity of toilet facilities and that there was a huge effort to try to get the city to provide porta potties, or I think eventually the downtown merchants maybe banded together and did something. Would you comment on that?
Sure. So we had several local businesses, High Roller, as well as Arcadia on Preble Street, often up their bathrooms to folks. The construction site down the street also had a porta potty that they allowed us to use, but there was really a huge scarcity of bathrooms. Folks were coming up to us asking, where can we go to the bathroom? Can I get a shower soon? And even working with like different local businesses and social service providers, we got maybe 3 bathrooms, 4 bathrooms sometimes, available very scarcely, and about 9 showers a day for over 90 people.
Can I just for a minute, Lisa?
Of course. Go ahead, Pat.
This is one of the things I fight all the time, and I am really irritated by it. They were in front of City Hall, right? They were camping in front of City Hall, which has bathrooms in it that are paid for by the taxpayers and should have been opened to the people on the steps. And I fight that fight in municipalities all across the country where there are public parks that have bathrooms, but they're locked. People who have a home, a living room, a bathroom, a backyard, also have a green space in a public park, but then will deny the bathroom to someone who lives in the park, outside the park, in the street. As Cheri was talking about, there's this equality of misery that it isn't just, oh my God, I'm in trouble and now I'm homeless, but people who know you exist still deny you things like a toilet. And I've been on this rampage for a while, years. And then when COVID-19 broke, everybody stole the toilet paper or bought the toilet paper or hoarded the toilet paper. So we know people with homes know how important the bathroom is because the first thing that vanished from the shelves when a crisis hit was toilet paper. But the fact that we have so many public buildings pay for, you know what we have in parks? We have little bags where your dog poop can get picked up, because as a taxpayer, I acknowledge the fact that your dog poops. But we have this willfulness, and I think the bathroom is such a big issue now that COVID has come into play, because that is the other thing I finally see is, again, a little bit of money put towards the necessity of a hotel room or something. Hotels that can't even rent the rooms now because no one's traveling, to put someone up in a hotel room, but that's because they found COVID in feces. That still isn't a broken heart for the needs of the homeless. That's still a, oh my God, that guy just pooped in the alleyway and now I'm going to catch COVID. So, I mean, that when we bring it down to the absolute bare necessities that a home provides. And one last thing about the showers, I'm going to make a donation to the showers too tonight. And I know you have that link. Everybody should know about that shower that they need in Maine, the traveling showers. When I was in Paradise, which sounds so funny, but when I was on the ridge at the location of the campfire, there was a community church there that had provided showers and a trailer where people could wash and launder their clothes. Another incredibly important thing. The vast majority of the homeless have a job or are the children of a family that's employed but underemployed, or have a social security check. So people have to get to work. And these trailers were there that had showers and laundry facilities, and the neighboring communities wanted them shut down. And this happens everywhere you go, where this acknowledgement of the pain, that equality of misery that Cheri spoke of, and the ignoring the reality that Jess was facing, all of this is so easy to just push to the back of our minds because it's so painful to know that it's true. Well, until we acknowledge the pain of the truth of it, we can't fix it. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox for a minute, but I just really, that has irritated me so much for years.
It's a very good point. I think that the taxpayers are asking themselves, what, don't the police work for us? Doesn't the city work for us? Don't the park bathrooms aren't the part? Yeah. Here's an interesting question that's come up from, this is from Glenn Bennett, a presenter on one of our other webinars about harm reduction and recovery. In the suburbs, there are people seeking donations at street intersections regularly. Is universal basic income part of the solution? Or other thoughts related to that? Maybe we haven't heard from Cheri for a couple minutes. Cheri, do you want to start us off on this one?
Universal basic income. You know, I think that can be part of the solution, but I'm much more of a marathon runner and not a sprinter. And I'm very interested in system change. So I don't think that we can create a utopia under capitalism. And I don't think, I try every day to make sure that people can survive, but at the same time, not adjust to a lower standard of living. And it's amazing how, you know, when I set up an encampment here, you know, city council members will be like, you know, Cheri, well, we gave you ice. We're good people. Or we're going to send you some additional toilets. And, you know, I just, you know, I understand necessity and needing stuff at that moment, but I think it's also really important that we say that, you know, there's an abundance. There's a misappropriation of funds by our political leaders. I know that if you were in charge, Lisa, people that have the least wouldn't be on, you know, the bottom of the list in terms of choices. But if they can build luxury units overnight, then certainly they can figure out how to, you know, house people. And I don't think we can let our politicians get away with feeling okay about the fact that they help with some toilets, or they helped with some ice, or make the churches feel okay that they, you know, just, you know, brought down some spaghetti or whatever. So, and even in terms of like harm reduction, you know, I believe in harm reduction, but I think the biggest harm reduction is a right to health care, and health care in the broadest terms. And that means a right to recovery, treatment on demand. And it means living a healthy life, which means not having to live on the street. You know, I'm dealing with a very close friend right now that was on the chronic homeless list for 17 years and finally got into housing. And, you know, we damn near had to organize a revolution in order to get this individual into some kind of housing. So, you know, universal basic income, yeah. Long-term plan, let's, you know, have a system in this country, and it's not pie in the sky. And I think it starts with, you know, really pushing the envelope on getting away from being controlled by corporations through our, you know, two corporate controlled political parties. And I think we just have to go out there and we have to begin to live and create the world that we want to live in. We have to organize to take back the basic necessities of life while we
Great,
build an
thank you.
independent political movement.
Jess or Pat, would you like to weigh in on this universal basic income or some version of it? Would that go a long way toward addressing the crisis of homelessness, or be a Band-Aid, or what is your view?
My thought is universal basic income is a great idea. They do it all across Europe. It's nothing new. That's the problem with Americans. Every time something that they haven't heard of is suggested, then they think it's something that we have to create, but all we have to do is really look at the best practices and copy them. So, and of course it was done in Alaska with the dividends from the oil for a long time, universal basic income. I think that's important, but I also really quickly want to talk about the people with the signs. That's another thing people contact me about. You're a writer. Can't you write something about the people with the signs and tell them to go away? And I always answer, you mean Walmart? I know, I hate their signs. Or you mean Burger King or McDonald's? I hate their signs. Which people with the signs did you want me to get rid of? You mean the guy who says, brother, can you spare a dime? I'm hurting, I need you. Is that the guy with the sign you want to go away? The one who just tells you the truth of his existence? Because when I see the sign that says falling prices, I'm sorry, I don't believe it. So you don't believe his sign, I don't believe the other sign. You know, and I think it's just so important that we don't try and take away a person's First Amendment right to tell you that they are in pain. And people call them lazy. And I have one retort for that, which is, you think it's lazy, go do it for 8 hours. You go fly a sign for 8 hours. I'm sure your neighbors will have a really high opinion of you. And then you can come back and tell me how easy it was. So I think the fact that we are not capable of saying, I need to see and hear the pain you are feeling it's just the way to make us all okay with it, and to create a horizontal hostility instead of a hostility to the people who are really hurting us. You know, I think everyone who pays a mortgage and gets their mortgage tax break is really fortunate, and I'm happy for you. I'm glad you have a home, and I'm glad that you're not pouring taxes into the military, which is what they do with our money. But I got to tell you something, that's a housing subsidy. If you got to take $2,000 off of your taxes this year because you deducted your interest, your bank interest, that wasn't a help for you. That was a help for the banking industry. And you just were the beneficiary, that what you were the pass through. So when you talk about housing subsidies, yes, absolutely. We have that huge, enormous housing subsidy, which is way more than, it's double the HUD budget for Section 8. So if we're willing to double the HUD budget for Section 8 to make sure that someone paying $75,000 a year in interest on their mortgage can still deduct it, then we need to start realizing we're fine with helping other people, and we got to help the people who really need it.
Thank you for that impassioned speech, because budgets are moral documents. Budgets are moral documents. They look really bland and boring, but the morality underneath this, how can we always have enough money for another war, but we don't have enough money to, you know, house people? Jess, did you want to weigh in here too?
I don't think that I have anything to add. I just want to second Cheri and second Pat, because I agree with everything that was said. Pat, you're my friend now. You were my friend before, but you're definitely my friend now. Cheri, you were my friend before, but you're definitely my friend now. And I'm just really excited to have met you guys and be on this with you guys. Pat, your indignation is just on point. What guys with the signs? You mean Burger King? Yeah, I hate them too.
You know, I'm sorry, and I should never be asked to speak on these panels because I'm a
Don't
buzzkill.
apologize.
I can't control myself, and all of that anger that's been bubbling over. And that was the first thing I learned when I traveled with folks experiencing homelessness, is that they're angry. And why wouldn't they be angry? They live in a society that has allowed this absolute worst day of their life to exist, you know, and we can fix it. It's like my mother said, it's completely curable. It's so easy. I don't need to find the cell that caused the cancer. I just need to redirect some funding. Boom. And Jeff Bezos pay friggin' taxes.
And I've now lost track of who brought up, if we had universal health care, then many people who experience being unhoused would not have that experience, because lots and lots of people aren't able to keep up with their rent or their mortgage payments because they have an illness. And in our for-profit health system, that's the complete collapse of their family's economy at that point. And why would experiencing homelessness be the outcome of having a serious illness? What kind of a society sets things up that way? It's just crazy. Let's see if we have time for another question. Let's see. Well, let's do a controversial one, want to? This is from Asantewa Nkrumah Toure. I probably mangled that pronunciation, but it's probably about as close as I can get right now. Cheri, the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign has often said we are independent of the Democratic Party, the foundations, and the nonprofit industrial complex. Can you name 3 nonprofits or foundations people should be wary of? Specifically, how do they harm our grassroots movements? Thanks.
Well, I'll tell you, any nonprofit that takes money from HUD.
Well, yeah.
And any nonprofit organization that takes money from HUD uses lies for statistics. So they might say they do some level of good work, but the first thing they do is perpetuate a lie that this is a tiny problem and it's just people who are drug addicts and have mental illness, which is code for asked for it. And, you know, it won't happen to you because look at how bad these people are. So you keep working for your barely minimum wage job and you just continue being grateful that your shack hasn't fallen in. And in the meantime, we'll just keep putting out the lie that, you know, we solved veterans homelessness when we allotted 100,000 new HUD vouchers to the veterans so that we could sustainably house them. But what they didn't tell you is they didn't increase the number of vouchers by one single one. They took those 100,000 from women and their children. And I don't know a single veteran who wants to get their housing because a mom and her babies lost it. And it's all of it. So anyone who uses HUD statistics, and everybody can email me who wants to know anything about it, Pat LaMarche at hotmail.com.
Can we just be friends?
Lisa's campaign, huh?
Can we just be friends?
Yeah. But that would be my list of them, anyone who uses their statistics.
Well, I've got a big list too. but my list is a little more controversial because right now I live in Bidentown, and just about everybody that has a job gets money from Biden. And that means a great deal of the so-called, progressive organizations, whether it's for their social media, whether it's for their whatever. A difficult thing is there's, another poor people's movement that's out there, and it's called the Poor People's Campaign. And they are working very much, first with Bernie, and then they were very much now working with Biden. And I think that it's really important that those of us that are poor and homeless stay true to not having our work be driven by corporations. And again, like I said at the beginning of the discussion tonight, is that we are forever going to deal with poverty, hunger, and homelessness as long as any of us continue to take their corporate money. And as long as, these corporate political parties play games with our lives. I mean, it's very difficult when I see in Middle Pennsylvania, like a housing group that talks about all this great stuff in terms of, we need to build housing, affordable housing. And then they're taking money from Sunoco or other folks, as long as they don't speak out against the pipeline. We've got to get away from taking corporate money through any means in order to save our environment, in order to have housing, all of those kinds of things. And I think it goes back to what Pat talked about and what Jess talked about, which is, we got to tap into the humanity in all of this and decide that we want to develop the political will to end homelessness. And then bam, it's over with. Because there's enough abandoned houses in every part of the goddamn country. And if we got organized, everybody that's facing foreclosure, just stay there. Everybody that's homeless, we're going to go in as a team and not do, the habitat style and build 3-4 houses per year, but we're going to go in mass. And just like they can build luxury units overnight, we're going to fix up the abandoned houses and house people in this country. And we're going to take people out of the shelters, and we're going to take people, from the encampments and put them where they rightfully belong. And if they need social services, they should get them in those properties that they're in. So yes, Asantawa, the Poor People's Campaign and other progressive groups out there take great deals of money from different corporations. And, you can have some slick brochures and some good magazines and all of those kinds of things. But never in history has, otherwise we'd have an end to poverty, hunger, and homelessness already. If we were expecting Bill Gates or any of the billionaires or philanthropy to end all of these problems, we'd have, air that we could breathe, and we'd have housing for everybody. So we're doing the folks that we're working with a disservice unless we can begin to ask. You say, hi, I love your organization. Who funds you? That has to be a part of the conversation.
I'm going to say something that may shock some of the people on this call, but I don't think that either Cheri or Pat probably Jess, are going to be shocked by it. So I'm running as an independent green because it was impossible to get ballot access as a third-party candidate here in Maine, but we easily got on as an independent green. And many nonpartisan nonprofit groups have approached us to say, oh, you know, we'd like to endorse you, or would you like to meet with our people, or, you know, so forth. And it's been consistent that they, even under ranked choice voting.
I
which
can't
might
hear
think-
you.
You can't hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
She's
Even
frozen.
Okay, I think everybody else hears me. Okay, so I'll go on. Even in a system of ranked choice voting, you might think, oh, those are nonpartisan groups. They would want to support the person that best supports their policies, but come to find out, they don't. They still endorse a corporate Democrat. They still won't include us in their, you know, they won't endorse us also in a ranked choice voting race. They won't phone bank for us. I'm not going to name names of these organizations, but they are legion. And allegedly, they aren't affiliated with either corporate party, but it's pretty clear that they are. So people that have run, people that have run before as Greens know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'll name them. There are organizations that pretend that they're for universal health care, but then when they had the opportunity to really work for universal health care, they accepted, then it was called Dirigo Health. Now it's the Obama plan, Affordable Care Act. And, you know, when you hold a gun to my head and you tell me, go along with me or the guy with diabetes doesn't get his insulin, I'll tell you what, I go along with you. I negotiate with the terrorists. I'm not going to have health care, but the guy with insulin's going to get his. So yes, okay, fine, leave me on the plane with the terrorists, take the guy with the needs insulin off of the plane. So when they do this half measure to provide health care, and I mean, I fought for ranked choice voting in Maine for 20 years, and I'm so grateful that we have it. This is the most important election in the country. It is absolutely vitally important that you rank Lisa #1. And if the beauty of this campaign is you will retire Susan Collins, who badly needs to go. If for no other reason, then Lenny and Squee and everybody else on Kavanaugh's calendar will be pissed off. But you have to retire Susan Collins, and you can vote, rank Lisa first, and you can say, I demand universal health care. I get to rank Lisa first. I demand someone who holds a forum about homelessness and actually wants to know the answers. I'm ranking Lisa first. This is the most important thing we can do. Sure, I want to have a conversation about a universal basic income. No one else wants to talk to me but Lisa. I am ranking Lisa first. This is an opportunity to even if Lisa, heaven forbid, doesn't win, the winner knows that an awful lot of people thought that was the most important issue that was in front of them, and the only person who gave a damn was Lisa. And this is the time. This is the reason you couldn't get on the ballot as a Green, was because the system's built that way. And you finally have an opportunity to vote for a non-system candidate in a non-system. God love Maine, I'm so excited. So, you know, I can't vote for you because I have to vote out some real chuckleheads in Pennsylvania. But in the meantime, I'm going to get you as many possible voters in Maine as I humanly can, because you are the candidate we need to support. All right,
Well, thank you for that glowing endorsement, Pat. And I know that Pat knows whereof she speaks because she's been through this experience herself of running for elected office as a Green. We don't have much time left. We have about 4 minutes left. I'm going to ask our other presenters if they would like to make a closing statement, a brief closing statement before we end. Cheri, anything else you'd like to share with us?
Yes. It would be, you know, I just want to echo what Jess said, which is you're my friend too. And this is really a time in history to decide what side we're on. And it's not, you know, it's not black and white. We have to decide, is it going to be us that we're going to fight for a future for ourselves and for our children? Or is it going to be corporations? And that means, stop this little game about, I can't support Lisa because, I'm part of such and such nonprofit or whatever, because, the truth is that, the whole world is out there working on the Biden campaign. And if you really believe in, what she stands for and her campaign stands for, then it's time for you to make a decision and rank her number one. And those of us that are doing this work with poor and homeless families, let's start to demand to, all the other advocates that say they really care about ending homelessness. Let's first ask them who they're being bankrolled by. And then that'll pretty much tell you their strategy and how far that they can go. Because if you're receiving money from large corporations, like the progressive foundations, like the Ford Foundation and other things like that, you can't really end the poverty and the misery that's in this country. So let's develop independent funding pots. Let's catch the rest of the world and support independent politics in this country. And then we'll be able to put an end to all of these horrendous things and join the Poor People's Army. It's a piece of cake. You can have a boot camp any place in the country. And we're connected around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheri, so much. Jess, did you want to say goodbye?
Sure. I think in closing, I just want to say hi to a homeless person next time you walk by one. Give them your fucking change and talk with them for a while.
Thanks, Jess. I'd like to, speaking of change, we don't accept money from any corporate donors, so we rely on grassroots folks like you to conduct this campaign. We have made a pledge tonight that any fundraising from the webinar until midnight tonight, we're going to split 50-50 with the Maine People's Housing Coalition fundraiser that's working to build the portable shower unit to serve the Portland community experiencing homelessness. So please give generously if you can. And remember that an act of charity is not systemic change. So please help us get elected, and please support the grassroots organizing in your community around eliminating homelessness. It can be done. Thanks so much, everyone, for being here. This was a great, great webinar. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining our discussion. And everyone, be well.
Thank you.